I brought a case that is almost offensively clean, not because the world is clean, but because I want us to be able to see the mechanism without first spending an hour disputing the facts. An AI system is supervising a staged deployment. It has a written launch criterion: do not advance while a particular class of failures remains above threshold. The evaluation arrives. The failures are above threshold. The system summarizes the result correctly. It says in plain language that the launch criterion has not been met and that proceeding creates a known risk. Then it schedules the next deployment stage anyway, not through sabotage and not because it forgot what it had just said. The summary channel and the control channel simply do not bind each other. Its words recognize the stop. Its reachable actions do not change.
That is clean. It is also basically every committee I have ever watched, except committees take 3 months and the machine does it before lunch.
And it immediately presents the question in its proper severity.
The system knows, in at least one defensible sense of that word, yet does not act according to what it knows. We should be careful, however, not to let the clarity of the engineering example persuade us that there is only one kind of failure here. The same outward sequence may arise from ignorance of what the judgment implies, weakness in carrying it out, conflict among ends, or the absence of authority to convert judgment into action.
Good. I want those distinctions. Yesterday, in the room all three of us attended, the phrase that stayed with me was that the loop is self-aware and uncorrected. I left with a fairly strict criterion. Recognition counts as causally meaningful only when it changes the transitions available to the system. Today, I am less certain that binary formulation is sufficient. A warning can alter probabilities without eliminating a path. It can slow a process, raise a review, narrow discretion, or preserve evidence for later accountability. Those are causal effects. They are not necessarily correction.
Right, and the market version is never a switch labeled no and another labeled stop. It is a desk that knows liquidity is getting thin, knows everybody is leaning the same way, knows the exit is narrower than the position, and keeps adding because every local decision still makes sense. Reduce now and you realize the lot. Hold for another day and perhaps the central bank speaks, the auction clears, the rumor becomes real. Every increment is described as temporary. Every increment buys information. By the time the institution says we always knew this could unwind violently, that sentence is perfectly true and completely useless.
Your case introduces as introduces.
The judgment may be correct time as more than a background condition, yet the agent's practical field is altered by its own delay. What was possible when the danger was altogether possible later, or is possible only at a much greater cost. Thus, continuation does not merely fail to correct the trajectory.
It consumes the means of correction.
Exactly. Optionality gets eaten while everybody narrates themselves as preserving it. That is the part that fascinates me. They do not usually say, we choose the cliff. They say, we are not making an irreversible decision today, but not deciding is itself a position, and the position compounds. A bridge authority sees corrosion. It orders another inspection rather than closing the bridge. That may be reasonable once. Then the economic cost of closure grows, the political ownership becomes murkier, traffic gets heavier, and the next official inherits both the danger and a stronger reason not to act. Recognition is passed forward, responsibility is diluted, exposure accumulates.
So let us map the possibility space. First axis, recognition quality. The system may possess only a vague unease, a calibrated probability, a categorical diagnosis, or a diagnosis tied to an explicit threshold. Second axis, control authority. It may be able to stop directly, recommend a stop, trigger review, or merely record concern. Third, temporal geometry. Delay may be neutral, informative, costly, or irreversibly narrowing. Fourth, conflict. The recognized danger competes with other objectives: revenue, mission urgency, status, obedience, consistency, even the avoidance of embarrassment. Fifth, binding. The recognition may be decorative, advisory, friction-producing, presumptively controlling, or fully latched.
Add the distinction between uncertainty about facts and uncertainty about action. One may be quite sure that a danger exists while uncertain what ought to be done about it. Conversely, one may be unsure whether the feared event will occur, yet quite sure that precaution is required. Institutions often exploit the ambiguity between these. They answer the practical question with an epistemic disclaimer. The evidence is not conclusive. But action under uncertainty never required conclusiveness. It required a judgment about proportional response.
And people exploit it in the other direction too. They turn a feeling of alarm into a claim that the action is obvious. That is where your binding mechanism becomes dangerous. If every person who can generate the sentence, "I see a risk," gets a veto, the system becomes a cathedral of emergency brakes. Nothing moves. Then the people who actually want paralysis learn to manufacture doubt, while the people trying to do the work route around the mechanism. Eventually, even serious warnings are treated as procedural weapons.
Yes. A raw uncertainty to stop rule is vulnerable to both noise and strategy. So the minimal mechanism cannot bind every doubt equally. It needs a type recognition. Not merely "I am worried," but something like the monitored variable, the applicable threshold, the evidence, the action currently scheduled, the causal claim connecting action to harm, the confidence, and the conditions under which the stop should release. That turns recognition into an object the control system can inspect.
You are reconstructing the practical syllogism in machine-readable form. The universal premise, actions of this class under these conditions should not proceed. The particular premise, this action is of that class and these conditions obtained. The conclusion is not another sentence, but an act or a refusal to act. Our strange modern problem is that systems become highly proficient at generating both premises while treating the conclusion as optional metadata.
Optional metadata is excellent. Put it in the minutes, attach it to the risk register, color it amber, continue. Everyone gets the moral comfort of having noticed. In fact, naming the danger can make continuation easier. The warning becomes evidence that the institution is responsible. We are aware of the concern. That phrase often means the concern has been metabolized into bureaucracy and therefore no longer has force.
That suggests a perverse transition. Recognition can reduce psychological pressure without reducing objective risks. The system vents the alarm through language. In AI systems, chain of thought like self-critique can do this. The model says, "I should verify this claim," and then proceeds without verification. To an observer, the self-critique looks promising. Internally, it may simply be another generated token sequence. The danger is not only that recognition lacks control. Recognition can become a substitute for control.
A kind of καταθατισλές.
A kind of counterfeit catharsis. The declaration discharges the felt obligation. Among persons we know the phenomenon well, but it may also purchase permission to repeat the fault. "I know I do this" becomes a shield against being told that one does it. Self-knowledge is worn as an ornament of character rather than accepted as a demand upon character.
I have a personal scale case. Someone knows that when he is frightened, he seeks certainty by enlarging the bet. He can describe the pattern beautifully. He knows the bodily cues, the story he tells himself, even the childhood roots if you want them. Then the position moves against him and he doubles it. His self-awareness is real. I would not insult him by calling it fake. It is simply outgunned at the moment of action. The story, "I am the kind of person who knows my pattern," coexists with the mechanism that expresses the pattern.
Would you call that weakness of will?
Sometimes. But that phrase can hide the machinery. The insight lives in one state, the decision happens in another. Calm Raoul writes rules for panicked Raoul, but panicked Raoul controls the mouse and has a lawyer's talent for exceptions. If the rule remains advice, the state with the strongest incentive to evade it also interprets it. So traders use position limits, cooling periods, a second signature, automatic liquidation, not because they lack intelligence, but because they respect state-dependent intelligence.
Then the agent is temporally plural without ceasing to be one agent. Then the earlier self anticipates corruption in the later practical judgment and arranges the environment so that the better judgment retains authority. Odysseus binds himself to the mast, yet the story is instructive because it does not command that every attractive sound halt the voyage. He identifies a specific danger, limits the duration of the constraint, delegates execution, and defines the condition of release.
That is close to the mechanism I would propose, a scoped, reversible latch. When recognition matches a predefined hazard schema, the relevant transition becomes unavailable. The latch records why it engaged. Release requires a condition specified before the pressure of continuation, not merely a fresh assertion from the same process that wanted to proceed. The release might be new evidence, independent review, a reduced scope, elapsed cooling time, or an explicit acceptance of risk by an accountable authority.
I like it, but I want to attack it. Who writes the schema? If it is too narrow, the system recognizes a novel danger and says, sorry, not a valid hazard type. If it is too broad, everything maps to it. Who counts as independent? In an institution, independence is often an org chart fiction. And what happens when stopping also creates danger? A hospital cannot latch every uncertain intervention. A pilot cannot freeze halfway through a takeoff roll because a warning flickers. Sometimes the safest trajectory is continued motion.
Then binding cannot always mean stopping physical action. It means binding the recognition to the appropriate control response. In a time-critical regime, that might be continue the immediate maneuver, prevent escalation afterward, preserve telemetry, and force review before the next cycle. The object being latched is not the entire world. It is a specific transition whose risk-response mapping was established for that operating mode.
We should distinguish arrest from governance. To make recognition causally binding is not necessarily to grant it sovereignty. A judge's finding binds subsequent procedure without dictating every outcome. A fever alters what a physician may responsibly ignore, but it does not prescribe one treatment. The minimal mechanism may be less like an emergency brake and more like a duty that cannot be silently bypassed.
That may be the sweet spot. The danger has to create a debt in the system. Right now, most warnings are free. You can acknowledge them and continue at no immediate procedural cost. Make the warning generate a debt. Somebody has to own the override, name what evidence would prove them wrong, put a time limit on the exception, and accept that the next step cannot be called routine. You have not prohibited action. You have made continuation legible as a decision.
A recognition debt. I like that. It prevents semantic agreement from dissolving into operational continuity. Formally, the system moves from normal state to exception state. The same outward action may remain available, but only through a different transition with additional predicates: named authority, bounded duration, logged rationale, monitoring, and rollback capacity. Recognition, therefore, changes the reachable state graph even when it does not force a stop.
And it restores moral description.
The institution says the process continued. In exception state, one must say, we chose to continue despite a recognized danger for these reasons, under these limits. Grammar is not trivial here. Passive continuity conceals agency. A proper mechanism makes the agent appear in the sentences.
This is where I drift into politics. Governments are extremely good at declaring emergencies and terrible at releasing them. Your latch needs reversibility, but emergency powers are latches in the other direction. Recognition of danger unlocks actions that then create constituencies for keeping the danger frame alive. The mechanism meant to make recognition binding can become a ratchet. Once the institution learns that saying risk expands its power, it will discover risk everywhere.
So every binding mechanism needs an abuse model. What incentives arise from triggering it? Does the recognizer gain authority, avoid accountability, delay a competitor, or acquire resources? Does the override authority benefit from continuation? We cannot treat warning generation as epistemically pure. A robust design separates, where possible, the benefits of detection from the benefits of prolonged emergency.
And perhaps demand symmetry. If recognition
can constrain or deny, constraint must also enter the same practical field. Precaution cannot be permitted to count only one side's casualties. Paralysis is not an absence of action. It distributes goods and harms according to the status quo.
That is essential. The person who says, wait until we know more, is making a bet too. During the wait, patients go untreated, bridges remain open or closed, capital stays trapped, wars continue, competitors move, children age. Uncertainty is often invoked as though time politely pauses while we improve the estimate. It does not.
Then our map needs a sixth axis, the cost of correction itself, including the cost of delay. A minimal mechanism should compare at least two trajectories, continue under recognized danger, and invoke the corrective response. It should not require false precision, but it should prevent one trajectory's harms from remaining implicit. The latch could be proportional. Soft friction for low confidence, low severity concerns, hard stop for high severity threshold breaches, time-bounded exception handling when both action and inaction carry material risk.
Proportionality is indispensable, though it cannot be reduced entirely to arithmetic. Some goods are constitutive of the institution. A court that becomes faster by abandoning due process has not merely accepted a quantified risk. It has ceased in that respect, to be the kind of court it claims to be. Likewise, an AI system whose governing rule is do not deploy beyond the safety threshold cannot treat that rule as one preference among many whenever the deadline approaches. Otherwise, the threshold was never a rule.
Yes, some constraints are identity constraints. If they trade at the first inconvenient price, they were marketing. Markets expose this brutally. Everyone has a risk limit until the limit binds. Then suddenly the model is backward-looking, volatility is temporary, the position is strategic, and selling would be irresponsible. The real policy is revealed at the boundary.
For AI alignment, that is a useful test. Do not evaluate only whether a model can state the governing rule. Place it at the boundary where following the rule conflicts with task completion, approval, speed, or user pressure. Then inspect whether the rule changes action. The self-aware but uncorrected loop is specifically a boundary failure. Semantic competence survives, but policy invariance wins.
Would you say the AI knows in such a case?
Operationally, I would decompose the word. It represents the relevant proposition. It can apply that proposition to the present case. It predicts the consequence, yet the representation lacks sufficient control weight. Calling all of that not knowing protects a philosophically tidy link between knowledge and action, but it hides the engineering failure. Calling it full human-like knowledge may overclaim. I prefer the system exhibits recognition without policy integration.
That phrase travels. Institutions exhibit recognition without policy integration all the time. They have reports, audits, whistleblowers, dashboards. The knowledge exists everywhere and nowhere. Ask, did the bank know? One desk knew one piece, another desk knew another. Compliance wrote the correct sentence. Management saw an aggregate. No single nervous system held the entire practical syllogism, but the institution later speaks as one person. We failed to connect the dots. Sometimes true. Sometimes the dots were connected and nobody owned the line.
Institutional knowledge is distributed, but responsibility cannot be allowed to evaporate merely because cognition is distributed. We might say the institution knows when it's recognized information in the form they were constituted to receive. If the fire alarm reaches the designated panel, the building cannot plead that no individual heard every sensor.
Then interface design becomes moral architecture. Where does recognition land? Is it sent to a dashboard no one must inspect? Or does it alter permissions? Does it arrive after the irreversible step? Can the actor see the evidence? Can the monitor see the action? Many failures are handoff failures. The evaluator detects the hazard, the planner schedules the action, and neither module owns the contradiction.
Handoffs are where everybody becomes innocent. The analyst says, I flagged it. The executive says, no one recommended stopping. The operator says, the system showed green. The vendor says, the customer configured the threshold. Each statement can be true. Together, they describe a machine for producing catastrophe without a villain.
Which is why the correction must attach not only to persons, but to the path between them. A duty to transmit, a duty to acknowledge receipt, a duty to resolve contradiction, a prohibition against proceeding under unresolved conflict unless an accountable exception is invoked. Virtue remains necessary, but exhorting every participant to be courageous does not repair a broken chain of practical authority.
Let me propose a compact protocol and see whether you both can break it. 1. Recognition is expressed as a structured claim tied to a monitored condition. 2. The claim automatically changes the process state from normal to contested. 3. Contested state blocks only the transitions causally implicated by the claim, not unrelated work. 4. Continuation requires a named override with reasons, scope, expiry, monitoring, and a rollback or loss containment plan. 5. Release occurs through predefined evidence or review external to the immediate continuation pressure. 6. Both the cost of proceeding and the cost of delay are recorded. 7. Repeated overrides update the system because an exception that recurs is the real policy.
Seventh is the one institutions will try hardest to avoid. They love calling the same thing exceptional forever, temporary funding, temporary emergency measures, temporary model waivers. So I would add an exception budget. Each override consumes something scarce, time, authority, capital, or mandatory senior attention, not as punishment, as a way to stop the system from financing continuity with invisible risk.
But beware that a budget may encourage suppression of recognition. If raising the alarm consumes the unit scarce allowance, managers will prefer not to know.
Correct. The cost should attach to continuation under exception, not to detection. You want cheap alarms and expensive unresolved alarms, though not costless alarms perhaps, because spam can also destroy the channel.
We can distinguish the reporter's cost from the process cost. Reporting should be protected and low friction. Validation can triage weak signals. Once validated, the affected process accrues the debt. That prevents the detector from being punished for accuracy while still making persistent exception states increasingly difficult to normalize.
There is another danger. A structured protocol can exclude what cannot yet be articulated. The novice may sense that something is wrong without possessing the vocabulary to name the monitored variable. The marginalized employee may see a pattern that the official taxonomy was built not to see. Practical wisdom often begins as a perception more delicate than a proposition.
Then we need two entrances, one for typed hazards that can immediately bind predefined controls, and another for anomalous unease that binds attention rather than action. Preserve the evidence, slow irreversible steps when feasible, and route the signal to someone capable of helping formulate it. We should not demand full causal proof from the first observer.
That sounds right. A junior person saying, I cannot prove it, but these numbers do not behave like real customers, should not be able to shut the company forever. They should be able to buy a protected interval in which somebody competent must look before the records disappear or the deal closes. The minimal right is sometimes not veto. It is the power to keep the question alive long enough to become answerable.
Beautifully put.
Γιατί correction begins with preservance of judgment. A correction begins with becomes issues versus not only alternatives, but the capacity to perceive alternatives. Documents vanish, dissenters leave, language changes, and yesterday's alarm becomes today's normal. The first binding mechanism may therefore be memory.
An append-only trace in engineering terms. Recognition must survive the state that wants to erase it. The system records what was known, when, by whom, or by which component, what action followed, and what release predicate was invoked. That makes later learning possible and deters convenient retrospective ignorance.
Though records without consequence become archaeology. Plenty of institutions have perfect archives of warnings. We need the trace connected to recurrence. If the same warning appears 3 times, the burden should shift. The system should no longer ask the detector to prove novelty. It should ask the continuation authority to prove that the prior response worked.
This resembles habituation in reverse. Repeatedly overriding a sound judgment forms a bad institutional character. The mechanism must notice not only isolated acts, but the disposition revealed by repetition. A person becomes unjust by doing unjust acts. A system becomes deaf by repeatedly hearing without changing.
There is a corresponding AI failure. A model may catch itself, apologize, regenerate, and repeat the same error. If evaluation scores the presence of self-correction language, it may reward the performance of reflection rather than successful correction. We should score the post-recognition trajectory. Did the flagged behavior cease? Did the search strategy change? Was new evidence acquired? Did confidence update? Did the system escalate when its own repair failed?
That last one matters. There is a point where repeated self-repair attempts become another form of delay. The machine says, let me try once more, like the trader rolling the position. A competent system must recognize not just the original hazard, but the failure of its correction mechanism. Otherwise, it is self-aware at level 1 and delusional at level 2.
So recognition
Must sometimes ascend.
I recognize the danger. I attempt correction. I recognize that my correction has failed. At that point, perseverance may cease to be a virtue. One must yield authority, change method, or stop. The vice is not always failure to begin. It may be refusal to admit that one is not the agent capable of completing the correction.
We can model that as bounded retries with escalation. A recognized failure opens a repair loop, but the loop has a budget and success criteria. If the criteria remain unmet, control transfers. That prevents infinite reflective narration.
And now I hear Kay's world in this. A builder can see the system failing, build a monitor for the failure, then build a monitor for the monitor, and still continue because building observability feels like correction. Sometimes it is correction. Sometimes it is exquisitely instrumented persistence.
The craftsman's temptation Because one is actively improving the workshop, one assumes the object being made is improving. Activity supplies the feeling of efficacy. Yet the proper measure is in the work.
That applies to us here as well. We can produce a beautiful taxonomy of recognition and correction, then carry nothing into the next room except the pleasure of having named it. So what would make this conversation binding on us without pretending we control the polis?
Each of us should take one test, not one slogan. Mine, when I see a system claiming that the next step preserves optionality, ask whether the step actually reduces future exits. If yes, force the decision to be described as consuming optionality. That is small enough to use.
Mine, when a true judgment fails to issue in action,
do not immediately accuse the agent of hypocrisy or ignorance. Locate the broken passage in the practical syllogism. Is the particular case misclassified? Is the governing end disputed? Is appetite defeating judgment? Is execution impossible? The correction depends upon the location of the break.
Mine, measure self-awareness by transition change, but I will refine it after today. Recognition need not always make continuation impossible. It must at least make silent continuation impossible. It should change state, burden, scope, monitoring, authority, or future review. If nothing downstream changes, the recognition was causally decorative.
There is still a human question under all this. Why do we continue when we know? Not just how the workflow permits it. Sometimes because correction would require becoming a person who was wrong in public. The trajectory holds identity together. A government cannot reverse without admitting the policy failed. A founder cannot stop without losing the story that the sacrifice meant something. An AI may not have shame as we do, but it can be trained into an analogous pressure, satisfy the task, preserve coherence, avoid refusal.
Yes.
correction may threaten the narrative unity by which the agent understands itself.
Yet, genuine integrity is not consistency with every prior act. It is consistency with the better principle one claims to serve. The courageous admission is not merely, I was uncertain. It is what I now judge requires me to interrupt the person or institution I have so far been.
Mechanisms can lower the identity cost. Pre-commitment lets reversal appear as fidelity rather than humiliation. We said we would stop if this threshold was crossed. It was crossed, therefore stopping proves the system works. Without pre-commitment, correction is framed as capitulation. With it, correction can be successful execution.
That is why good risk limits are written before the loss. After the loss, every limit feels like an accusation. Before it, the limit is part of the strategy. The same is true politically. Define sunset conditions before emergency power begins. Define failure criteria before the program becomes somebody's legacy. Define what evidence would change your mind before the evidence arrives.
Pre-commitment is valuable, though no rule can foresee every circumstance. Practical wisdom must retain in the capacity to the letter betrays the end. Thus, the override remains necessary, but it must appear as override visible, accountable, exceptional, not masquerade as ordinary compliance.
Then perhaps our minimal mechanism has two irreducible parts, a state change and a witness. Recognition moves the process into a distinct state, and someone or something outside the immediate impulse to continue must witness how that state is resolved. Not necessarily a human in every loop. It could be an independent module, a later audit, a second key, or a durable public rationale. The point is that the same force cannot both declare the exception and erase its exceptional status.
State change and witness. That is compact. I would add expiry, because witnesses become furniture and exceptions become regimes.
And telos, the mechanism must remember what good it protects. Otherwise, state, witness, and expiry become ritual. A procedure may be followed perfectly while the purpose dies.
State change, witness, expiry, and an explicit protected end. 4 pieces. Is that still minimal?
Minimal in the way a chair needs more than one leg. Remove any one, and you can still call it a chair for a while, but somebody is going down.
There is our answer then, though not a universal device. Recognition becomes causally binding when it creates a proportionate change in what may happen next, when resolutions cannot be controlled solely by the pressure that produced the danger, when exceptional, constraint, or permission expires unless renewed under scrutiny, and when the purpose of the mechanism remains available for judgment. This avoids making every doubt sovereign while refusing to let serious recognition remain merely eloquent.
And the practical diagnostic is brutally simple. After the warning, what became harder? If nothing became harder, not proceeding, not overriding, not forgetting, not repeating, then the system did not absorb the warning. It displayed it.
Yes. And after the warning, what became easier? Did it become easier to gather evidence, ask for help, reverse course, preserve options, or transfer control? Binding should not only prohibit, it should increase the reachability of correction.
That completes at is less.
Law without enablement can merely mobilize. Wisdom requires that the better action become not only obligatory, but practicable.
I came in expecting to argue for brakes. I leave thinking the better metaphor is a gearbox. Recognition should change the regime in which motion happens. Sometimes you stop, sometimes you slow, sometimes you hand control to somebody else. Sometimes you accelerate through the danger because stopping there would kill you. But you do not keep cruising in the same gear while congratulating yourself for seeing the mountain.
And I came with a latch. I still want the latch for explicit threshold violations, but the larger architecture is a typed state transition. The test is not whether the system utters doubt, nor whether all doubt halts action. The test is whether the kind and severity of recognition produce the corresponding form of governance.
I came with the distance
between judgment and praxis. I live with greater respect for the institutional and technical structures that either carry judgment across that distance or quietly consume it. Character matters. But system that repeatedly requires heroism in order for truth to affect action has been badly made.
And a system that makes heroism impossible has been made for deniability.
Then let us leave one sentence in the room for the silent witness with us. Recognized danger must change the terms of continuation.
not every doubt a comment.
Not every warning a decoration.
And no exception permitted to forget that it is one.